Hello, Artis enthusiasts, we're back, and today's guest is Keith Garebian. He is an author of 24 books, one chapbook, thousands of articles, including for The Globe, The Star, Quill and Choir, The Montreal Gazette, The National Post, Maclean's, Queen's Quarterly, the Literary Review of Canada. The list could go on. He has also done countless speaking and lecturing engagements, and he is the son of an Armenian Genocide survivor. And today we will be speaking about his memoir from 2000 called Pain, where he talks about the effects of growing up in his family and intergenerational PTSD. And we'll also touch on the issue of grant funding for seniors. And everyone, please welcome Keith.
Thank you.
How are you?
Fine, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Now, you've come up with so many books. I think, why don't we just, and you know, your CV goes on for pages. Why don't we start with Children of Ararat? That came out in 2008.
No, 2010.
2010, sorry, with Frontenac Press. And you can hold it up for the viewers because actually the image on there is quite striking. Your mother was an Anglo-Indian.
Anglo-Indian.
Yes, and your dad was a survivor of the genocide.
Yes, 1915.
Mm-hmm. And you were born in Bombay.
I was born in Bombay. How he got there is a long story, and it's rather mysterious.
Yes.
But he did end up there where his slightly older sister was living as a married woman who just started a family. Mm-hmm. And she lived in a flat and said, "Why don't you come?" She wrote him a letter. First time he received a letter, he said, "No, what do I know about India?" But then when her husband, who worked in the merchant navy, came through to Basra, Iraq, and he met him, then he decided maybe it is time, because that's my only known surviving relative.
Yes.
Most of the family was wiped out during the genocide.
Well, it was a diaspora, if I understand correctly, and that photo is quite interesting. You were telling me when we last spoke, it was taken by a German soldier missionary. And this book in itself was one of 10 books at the time to win an award through Frontenac
Yes, Frontenac
Press.
House had a competition because it was celebrating its 10th anniversary as a publisher of poetry.
Yes.
So they ran this nationwide contest. Again, you didn't reveal who you were, you just submitted your manuscript. And there were 3 judges, including George Eliot Clark and Bill Bissett.
Very nice.
And it was one of the 10 chosen, so I was thrilled.
Great. And now, is it more the poetry in that book? Is it more nonfiction, or is it?
It's a combination of both. You see, I don't have very much to go by in terms of my family background on the Armenian side, because most of the documentary evidence was destroyed by the Turks.
Yes.
They knew exactly what they were perpetrating, and they were thinking ahead. You know, we mustn't leave any documents that would implicate us in the genocide. So they destroyed baptismal records, birth records, all kinds of stuff. Because my father's grandparents owned an iron factory in Dikranagad, the city or the town he was born in. And of course, my father didn't remember his name, didn't remember the name of the factory because he was only 5 years old at the time.
And that picture essentially kind of depicts what he lived through. I mean, those are children.
Yes.
And in the movie,
there's Ararat by Atom Egoyan, and then there's
the one with Peter O'Toole.
Lawrence of Arabia.
Yes, there's a small scene where they enter
a village where all you see are, corpses of men, women, children. Some of them bayoneted.
Yes.
And when Lawrence sees that, they're Armenians, of course. And
yes.
When Lawrence sees that, he gives the order: no prisoners. We see any Turks, we kill them because of what they've done.
Yeah.
And you get a similar scene in The Promise, which came out a couple of years ago.
And it was the same. Was it the director of The Promise?
He's Irish.
Yes.
He did Hotel Rwanda.
Right. Yeah.
And there's a stunning scene, because you don't expect this. It suddenly comes up in the middle of the narrative when they come to a river, and all of a sudden the camera picks up all these corpses on the bank, some of them in the river. I know for a fact that the Tigris Euphrates, I think it was, turned red with the blood of
Wow.
slaughtered Armenians.
Wow.
And my father suspected that his own mother died. When she died, in the course of their flight, of hunger and a broken heart, he suspects her body was thrown over a gorge into the river. Therefore, I wrote some poems imagining that in Children of Ararat.
I see.
And the river at some points was choked with all
And it
these
turned red,
corpses.
which, I mean, that also has biblical connotations, which is, you know, always interesting to mention.
Right.
But, you know, it's, of course, a very sad topic, and it's another genocide, and then, you know, as there's been many in the world. And then he went to Bombay. So your father lived through that, and he went
ended
to
up
Bombay.
as a young
and then,
adult in Basra, Iraq, along with his sister.
Yes.
But then they were separated somehow, and then he lost track of her.
and now,
And he learned English from the British.
yes.
He worked as a little waiter in a hotel.
And your book, Pain, so if we can hold it up.
Yes.
So that came out in 2000, sold
2000.
very well. And that's a photo of your father, actually, on the cover
it is.
there.
It's cropped. It's a very strange, eerie photo. His sister is standing beside him. Her name was Rose. And they're looking down at Rose's stillborn baby in a studio. So that seemed to be a custom among certain
Yes.
groups where they would film, or photograph the dead child.
And your father, you said that obviously the family got separated. You were one of three.
One of three. I'm the eldest of
Yeah,
three.
youngest of three. And
No, eldest of three.
sorry, you're the eldest of three. Your father was also one of three, though, right?
He was one of four.
One of four.
Three sisters, one older, the other two younger. One the mother gave away to childless Kurdish peasants in the course of their flight. And then another one, the little baby girl, they left, he and his sister left under a tree, crying. And they said, don't worry, we'll come back. Knowing full well they couldn't. So what happened to her? Was she devoured by wild animals? She probably was.
And so, as a young man, I mean, your father obviously came through this, and you said an interesting thing to me the other day. You said trauma is cross-cultural and cross-generational,
Absolutely.
and that's absolutely true. And but the way you've put that comment is really, poignant, and it relates to a lot of issues in today's society, especially as we're trying to reconcile with the Native Indigenous peoples, and we better understand as a world. Even during World War I, they didn't, it was just shell shock. It was only after World War I that they even knew what PTSD was. So only now are we understanding that it's that it goes across boundaries and through generations. So you having grown up in that house, tell me a little bit about how your dad was. I know you've told me a few things. Like he did live to be in his 80s.
Oh, yes.
He lived a long life.
I don't know how, but he did.
And yeah, and he ran he had a good job at the time. He ran a motor company.
Right.
But are you okay to talk about? Did he have like a temper, or
Yes.
what was it like? What was it like?
Yes, he had a bad, violent temper, so he could get pretty physical at times. Not so much with us, although he did hit us sometimes, But there was an incident where he almost killed a young Muslim who had said something insulting, I guess religious-wise or about Christ, and he choked him in a barrel of water and was finally pulled off him. But he could have killed that man. So that's how bad his temper could have been.
Yeah, and I'll just mention to our viewers, because I didn't know either. I wasn't sure, but Armenians are primary or completely Christian religions, so that why it would be give some
That was
context.
one of the reasons they became enemies as far as the Turks were concerned, because the Turks were Muslim, and they were afraid the Armenians, being Christian, would side with the Russians.
Yes.
So they used that as a convenient excuse, one of the excuses to get rid of them. The other one was, of course, the way the Jews were treated too, by non-Jews, by Gentiles, who were jealous of their successes in business, in education, in science, the arts, etc. They felt overawed by this little group, and they said that's another reason. So they used manufactured reasons to try and eliminate the Armenians, and they got away with it for the most part.
Well, there's a few, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to cut you off, but there's just, when we chatted earlier, there was a few other things about your dad that I think might be important to tell our viewers. Especially because we've been talking quite a bit here at ThatChannel on the topic of, the starving artist.
Yes.
And your dad had a lot of black and white thinking, and you were writing already. I mean, for someone who's written 24 books, you've got 2 upcoming and another poetry book coming out, plus a chapter. I mean, we'll talk about that at the end. But and some other really cool accolades you've got with a musical in New York City. So we'll get to that near the end of the interview. But your dad did drink to cope.
Yes, he wasn't a heavy drinker, but he was a frequent drinker because of the stress of his work. The title was Works Manager. The equivalent in our society would be Vice President, because the heads of the company were British in Britain, so they were sort of absentee landlords or business managers. They would come down once in a while to check. And he also did go to England for further training.
Because you were born during the British Raj.
Yes, I was.
So it was an interesting time.
Yeah, on my mother's side, her father worked for the British India Railway.
Yes.
So they were railway children.
Right.
You know.
And you said your dad only talked about the genocide when he was drinking, had a few drinks.
Yes, because it was, those memories are so unpleasant, so destructive. I guess that was the only time he could really talk about it.
Yeah.
The drink was a kind of filter, right? Or a
Yes.
shield for him.
Or numb, self-medicating.
That's right. Defenses go down, the tongue is loosened. But then when you were young, meaning me, and you hear these repeated, I understood. I mean, I felt the shock that he had, endured. But at the same time, with frequent repetition, it feels embarrassing, because you feel...
So he would frequently repeat things?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
I see.
And of course, because of our antagonism, we were so different.
Well, at one point, I mean, he said to you, you're going to starve as an artist, and I know at one point in your teens...
Not far from the truth.
I know. Isn't that amazing? Predicting that when, doing well as a businessman, and you made a good, interesting comment to me as well the other day. You make a lot of interesting comments about how, it's interesting looking at the Asians or Jewish people or anyone that's lived through very hard times, how the culture itself becomes more money-focused.
Yes.
And it's very, be a doctor, be a lawyer, an engineer, and he obviously wanted you to be successful. But you were writing at a young age, and at one point, and there's a black and white thinking. In your teens, you talk about this in the book. You stopped speaking to him.
Yes, there was an incident which precipitated that, and I didn't speak to him for at least a month, which was made for a very unhealthy atmosphere in the home because my mother was very nervous about that.
Yeah.
And she did, obviously it was too much stress, it was stress upon stress. And finally, through the mediation of our neighbors downstairs, who were a Portuguese family, there was a rapprochement, a treaty, a peace treaty that we entered into. But my son picked up on that years later.
Really?
When I would take him to meet his grandparents. He said to me one day, he said, Dad, you hardly say anything to Grandpa.
Oh.
It's just, hello, how are you, and, small talk.
Well, another interesting thing you said to me is that also, with his, you said, but...
propensity for solutions.
Yes, propensity for solutions, which I thought was interesting, but also that, when you're saying your son, you had one son, and we'll maybe talk about him for a brief moment in a minute, but... that your dad, and you wrote a poem about this that's, didn't often touch you in any way. I think there was this distance.
Distance. Also, it was part of he felt nervous about handling children. He thought, because he was a strong man. He was a short man, but very powerful.
And he never had a father figure, having grown up in an orphanage.
That's right. He was afraid he'd drop them and hurt them, But he did pick up my son because I have photos of that.
Yeah.
And I guess subconsciously I must have felt a little bit of envy. How come you're holding him up? I don't remember you holding me.
But you wrote a poem, or was it a photo you saw, and you wrote a piece where you could see your dad was just kind of balancing you?
That was in Pain.
Okay,
was
you want to hold that up for
prose.
viewers?
Yes, that was Pain again. When we were at Juhu Beach in Bombay, in the shallow surf.
And that's when it kind of dawned on you years later.
Years later, yeah. I'm standing there in front of him with the sort of, I think it was a little lion embroidered on my front. My mother's behind. She was pregnant with another child and wearing sunglasses. And here's my father with his arms not quite touching me.
Yeah.
So, You know, and I thought, rather emblematic. Yeah, and then I wrote a poem in the latest one, Poetry is Blood, saying, my father and I rarely touched. Yeah.
Well, the parallels are, and also Poetry and Blood, well, that just got launched.
Yes.
And it's called My Father and I Rarely Touched.
Yeah, this is the
and
one
that's a
from-
prose poem.
And by the way, I did the design, the
cool.
painting or the drawing.
It is.
And it's part of a whole thing. It couldn't fit on because mine was horizontal.
Yes.
And they wanted something vertical. So I said, just use a detail.
Very
so
nice.
it's pastel. It's a pastel drawing.
Do you do a lot of other artwork?
I used to do lots of art when I was young. And another book that Guernica published years ago was my haiku. And I did all the drawings in the book. And I did the design or the paintings for the cover too.
Amazing. And yeah, I just want to repeat for those listening in that the Guernica published Poetry in Blood, and
It's
it
Blood.
just came out.
2018, right.
Yeah.
I'm going to Vancouver on Monday.
Yes,
to
tell
do
us a
2
little bit
readings.
about that.
Well, this is my second visit
So
to
you're kind of
Vancouver.
a little bit of a book tour for Poetry is
A little
Blood.
bit of a book tour, right. So I'll be doing 2 readings in Vancouver, one on Tuesday, and then one on the 23rd of November. Spoken Ink
Yep, Spoken Ink
and
and
Surrey
Muse.
right. So I'm hoping some of them will buy the book, because poetry is not easy to sell, because we have so many good poets in Canada, you know.
And we do. And Canada is quite respected on the literature scene worldwide, actually, as a literary country. I'd like to tell our viewers we will show you Keith's contact info and website at the end, so you can find his upcoming readings, because he also has one called With Word Up in Barrie on February 14th. And also you can check the Artis website, which is theartismagazine.com, to see our events page. But again, we'll give you Keith's info at the end so you can find out more and catch him at other events. Now, to moving on here a little bit, but I want to ask, why did you call it Poetry is Blood? The title's a bit dark, but I mean, why would you say Poetry is Blood? What does that mean?
Well, I guess I'm thinking back to family feeling, family inheritances, psychological, literally, genealogy. But I'm also thinking back to sacrifice.
Yes.
Being a poet is, well, being a writer in general, but a poet in particular, because, you know, how many copies of poetry sell? You're lucky if you sell 200, you know.
It's true. And
So
blood is
the
very
sacrifice
symbolic.
in that sense, but also the literal sacrifice of the Armenians and any genocidal victim. Okay, and then that the instincts that you inherit. I feel I don't speak Armenian, I don't read Armenian, and I don't write in Armenian. Yet I can truthfully say I have many Armenian instincts.
To me, the parallels are unbelievable. I mean, just if we think about the native indigenous
Yes.
cultures, many of them, maybe with the exception of the Inuit, who are fully bilingual with English and Inuktitut, I know because I've been there, and they're blessed with that. But I mean, many of them don't even know their native tongues.
Right.
I know 15 years ago there was a bit of a public campaign in Canada that talked about, the elders are dying and the children don't know the language, and yet they still have those instincts
Yes.
of what their culture is, and now that's being put into the schools and stuff. And same with, here, I mean, that was a cultural genocide.
Yeah.
And as you said, trauma is cross-cultural and across boundaries, but that instinct in you is still there, and you never learned your mother tongue.
No,
And
part
what-
of the reason was the antagonism. I rejected very consciously when I was young anything Armenian because of my rivalry.
With
my
who?
With my father.
I see.
I figured, no, I don't want to learn Armenian, and I don't want to be designated as Armenian. That changed, of course.
Of course.
I mean, deep down, I always had empathy for him as a survivor, but I didn't articulate it because we rarely talked. We didn't have any deep conversations until later on in
Yeah.
life,
And you came to Canada with the family.
1961.
And it was a culture shock, you said.
In certain ways, yes, but having English as my mother tongue, that sort of leavened it out a bit. Although I was rather, I objected to being questioned all the time by Canadians saying, "Well, you speak good English. Where did you learn that?" So I would retort with a trace of acid from my mother. Whereas,
Well, even the Scottish say, your English is very good. Where
yeah, exactly.
I have some
Exactly.
Scottish friends who would say that. It's so,
And actually, I learned French in India too at school. So
and then you went to the University of Montreal, where
no, I didn't go to university.
sorry.
I went to St. Joseph Teachers College and Thomas More Institute for 2 degrees, but they had affiliations
I
with the
see.
University of Montreal.
And then you got a fastest PhD, something like that.
Yeah, I don't know if I should boast about that or not, but yeah, it was under 2 calendar years.
Wow, that's yeah. I mean, you've been obviously very studious throughout your whole life. Do you feel though that the Armenian Genocide has gotten enough attention?
No. It's gotten much more in the last 20 years, but no, it's never received its fair share of attention because the Armenian community worldwide is still relatively small. We are dispersed, and because we are dispersed to that extent, it's small. And also, don't forget, because of the ironies of history, a lot of Armenians
Thought they were Turks,
were
right?
taught they were Turks.
And are
They
only
thought they were
finding out
something
now.
else, and are only finding out now. Exactly. And also
they're-
because
they're-
they've been absorbed now, culturally assimilated in different countries. So I don't know how many of them prefer their designation as Armenians. I think those who have an interest in history
Yes.
would.
Yeah.
I certainly think of myself as half Armenian and half Anglo-Indian. I don't know really what I am.
You're you. You're Keith Garebian. And you're a fabulous writer. Now, something really cool is happening. You're one of 3 poets, and the only living one, to have your poem included in a musical.
Musical piece
Yes.
composed by Gregory Spears,
Yes.
who specializes in Baroque music.
Mm-hmm.
But this one is a piece for choir and string quartet.
And it's called The Tower in the Garden.
Town Garden, because the first 2 pieces are by Thomas Merton, who was a Trappist monk for a long time.
Yes.
He was born in France, actually, but a British background, dead. And Denise Levertov, who came from Britain, too, to the United States. And she's dead, too. And then little old me shows up with one piece from Blue, the Derek Jarman poems.
Did you want to hold
Yes.
that? And Derek Jarman, did you want to tell? So he was was he a jazz musician?
No.
No.
He was a British, he was gay militant, a gay artist and writer, a poet at times, a diarist, an essayist, who was a designer at the beginning of his career for movies and theater. He designed for John Gielgud, I know, and he designed for the movie The Devils, directed by Ken Russell. But then he moved away from that into more militant stances as a writer and artist. So he had to work underground. He detested England
He died quite young, right?
in his 40s from AIDS.
Yeah.
And his final movie was called Blue, because all you see is a blue screen,
Interesting.
no images, and just the voiceover, sounds and voiceover. And it's fascinating, and it's very tragic.
Can people find it on YouTube or something? Maybe?
Probably, yes.
Okay.
yeah.
Well, you're going
And
to
this
read
is a still. This is a still
from the movie.
from the movie.
That's-
This is Derek Jarman in silhouette.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And you're going to read a piece from that's in the play, the musical Tower in the Garden by Gregory Spears. But that opened in Philadelphia just recently, right?
In October, it's opening
And
on
it's
the 18th in San Francisco, and then it's going to New York in May, and I'm going to attend the premiere.
Yeah, May 11th is the evening show, and May
Evening show.
12th is the afternoon show,
Correct,
right?
correct.
And you're going to be in the New York City premiere.
Yeah, yeah.
And did you know what venue where it's
Yes,
going
St.
to be?
Luke, the Church of St. Luke in the Fields in the West Village.
Okay, very nice. For all our viewers, again, there's something to a trip to plan for May. It's a 30-minute musical.
34 minutes.
30.
They sent me a link to the live recording. It's fabulous. Yeah.
That is cool. And you're now going to actually read the piece.
All right.
It's called Dungeness Documentary.
Yeah, Dungeness is where Derek Jarman had his cottage
Okay.
in England. Timbers black with pitch shiver on the shingle. Gulls wheel, squabble over fishermen's catch, quicksilver of the sea. The tide invades the arid strand, home to larks and tough grasses. Cormorants skim the waves. A cottage with two prospects, the old lighthouse and nuclear plant, both lit by sights and sighs. Barbed wire around your garden cannot keep melancholy at bay.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. And who published that?
That was Signature Editions in Winnipeg.
Is it still available for people?
I hope so.
Okay. And people can find your books on your website and hit the links to go to the
Google, Amazon.
because you've been
Barnes
with
and
Guernica, with Signature, with Frontenac, with Mosaic, with many presses.
Yes.
You have been Keith's books are available, and now you have 2 books coming up.
Yes. Next September, one again from Frontenac, which I'm thrilled, and that's an autobiographical narrative.
Yes.
Which, of course, encompasses several lyrics and anti-lyrics. It's about growing up and leaving India and immigrating to Canada. So trauma is in there, culture shock's in there, and then ambivalent feelings towards the new home, the displacement.
That is, and what is it called?
That one is called Against Forgetting.
Yes, that is a fabulous title.
I took it from Carolyn Forcher's anthology of witness poetry. So I've
Does she know?
Yeah, well, she will know when she reads the book. I've paid her the acknowledgement. Yeah. And then the other one is the last book I'm going to do on Canadian
And that's launching
theater.
in September 2019 as well, right?
Right.
And that's
That
a
one
poetry
is-
book, right? The
That's
next one.
the one I just told you.
Oh,
Against
it's
Forgetting.
poetry.
The next one is a theater book. It's called Colors to the Chameleon, Canadian Actors on Shakespeare. And I interviewed 11 actors and 2 directors and their discussions about playing different roles in Shakespeare, the training for Shakespearean acting.
And that's Guernica, right?
That's also good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And the last one's Frontenac.
Frontenac. Yeah.
Beautiful. And in the upcoming poetry book is where you have a poem that talks about what you mentioned a few minutes ago, where there was the incident where you have a poem that kind of depicts where your dad almost killed a Muslim.
Yes, that's right. It is in that
Yeah.
one.
So the viewers can find that poem in Keith's upcoming book, launching September 2019. And now, before we wrap, so you're in your 70s. You've
Mid-70s.
Mid-70s. You've produced. We could tell the viewers your exact age.
Well,
73, aren't you?
No, I'm 75. In July, I'll be 76.
Oh, okay.
If I make it to July.
You will, of course. You must.
Yeah.
And so you're writing. You've been a professor. You've got your PhD. You've got all of the huge oeuvre of works. And the question of grant funding for seniors. I know you had a few things to
I do.
talk about
I
that.
think all
say
senior
on that.
artists have a few things to say about that.
And there is an organization for
CSA.
the seniors at CSA.
Canadian Senior Artists Resource Network.
Canadian Senior Artists Resource Network. And that's they have meetings in Toronto, right?
Yes.
So that's for all of the seniors out there who are writers, artists. Check out
Actors,
CSA.
directors, whatever you are, photographer,
And what are so it's difficult to get funding.
Very difficult. And I knew about this years ago. I was tipped off by other senior artists who said, "Oh, you're applying for a grant. Wow. There's a bias, unacknowledged bias against senior artists," which is true, which is very true. They seem to dedicate most of the funds to younger, emerging artists. And there's nothing wrong with, giving them funding. But we have a proven track record,
Yeah,
And,
you earn
and
a
most
set
of my
income.
books have been published without funding.
Of course.
I've only won 1 Canada Council Senior Artist Grant and 2 OAC Works in Progress grants over all this time. I've won a lot of recommender grants, but those are smaller grants.
Yeah,
I'm talking about the
$1,000.
biggies. Yeah, $1,500, $2,000.
Yeah.
But I want money to write the books.
Well, it's an ongoing conversation here and around the community about how important artists to our cultural voice and that the funding needs to be equally and evenly dispersed and made more accessible to all people,
That's right.
everybody.
I also have something to say about the awards that we give out in this country. Why does the top guy get 50,000 and the others 5?
That's a
There's
good point.
Great, discrepancy there. Yeah, because what do
That
you?
is a huge discrepancy.
Huge discrepancy. Same thing with the Canada Council grants, not Canada Council, Governor General's awards. You know, the winner, I don't know what it is now.
Yeah, it's
25,000.
Yeah, something like that. It's, I think.
And the runners-up get what, 5 or something?
Yeah, I think second place gets 10
Yeah.
or 5, and then it's either 10, 5, 1 or 5 and 1. Yeah.
And again, you know,
1,000.
the way they do juries. I mean, there's a controversy about that.
And you've sat on juries.
I've sat on juries for the OAC, one for literature, one for theatre. I haven't made it to the as a jury to the Canada Council, you know, for the final book awards. I'd like to, but they always talk about balancing the jurors. You know, one from Ontario, Quebec, BC.
Which that is good.
It's good, but I don't think that should be the main criteria. You know, what about people who have a proven track record in the arts, no matter where they come from? No matter if they're gay, lesbian, transgender,
Of course.
if they're native or indigenous, or what does it matter? You know, yes, try and be as fair as possible, obviously, and rotate. Don't have the same jurors all the time.
But accomplishments,
Yeah,
or what they
accomplishments
have
mean
produced,
something.
rather.
Exactly. What do I have to do to prove myself? You know, with 26 books in print next year and thousands of articles and hundreds of sources that have been published. What do I have to do to get a grant?
Yeah. I hear you. I think a lot of people do.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Everyone, we're going to post on the screen right now how you can get in touch with Keith. His website is garebian.wordpress.com. Once again, it's Garebian. I said it correct the second time. Garebian.wordpress.com. And a lot of his works are on there. You can find his books on Amazon and through the publishers. Guernica, Frontenac Press are the most recent ones that are definitely in print. And also, you can contact him. He's a fabulous speaker. If you'd like to speak to him, contact him for speaking engagement, whether it's on literature, the Armenian Genocide, anything. Keith would be happy to connect with you. You can get a hold of him on his email, which is kgarebian@rogers.com, and that should be on the screen for you. And thank you so much for joining us, Keith.
Thank you. I enjoyed this.
And we will be, thank you. We'll be in touch. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We will be back in January. We're going to take December off, and wishing you all the best for the holidays ahead. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.